At the age of 73, I thought I had seen everything life had to offer. My name is Evelyn, and for most of my life I had lived a quiet, content existence. But everything changed the day I fell in the bathroom. The old house, the one my late husband Henry and I had spent decades building with our own hands, felt like a prison. The stairs I had once bounded up without a second thought had turned into towering obstacles. The tub that had been the scene of so many relaxing baths now loomed like a dangerous pit. After my fall, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had become a trap, a reminder of my diminishing strength. "Mom, you can't stay here alone anymore," my son Daniel said, his voice tight with concern. "Please, come stay with us, just until you're back on your feet." I didn't want to leave. I never imagined I'd have to leave my home, the place where my heart had been since Henry passed. It was a home filled with memories, our kitchen where we laughed over morning coffee, the living room where we danced to our favorite songs, and the garden that bloomed with the love we planted together. But Daniel was right. I couldn't manage alone anymore. I packed a small suitcase and told myself it would only be for a short while, just until I could hire someone to help at home. The first few weeks with Daniel and his wife Charlotte weren't as bad as I'd expected. Their modern home, sleek and minimalist, was a far cry from the cozy chaos I'd grown used to. Charlotte kept everything spotless, making me feel like an intruder every time I left a mug on the counter or a book on the couch. "Mom, we have coasters for a reason," she'd say, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I apologized, told myself to be grateful, and tried to help when I could. I cooked meals when my hip wasn't hurting too badly. I helped take care of their dog, even though I wasn't the spry woman I used to be. I offered to pay rent, but Daniel refused, saying, "You're family, no need." Family. The word once brought me comfort, but that was before I realized how much of a burden I had become to them. The tension began when I mentioned hiring a caregiver to help me get back to my own home. We were having dinner, a simple meal I'd prepared despite the aching in my bones. I'd hoped the meal would soften the news, but when I mentioned it, the silence was palpable. "You want to go back to that big house, Mom?" Charlotte asked, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't feel right. "At your age?" "It's my home, Daniel," I replied quietly. Daniel exchanged a look with Charlotte, and my stomach tightened. "We've been talking," Daniel said, his voice lacking the warmth it once had. "We think it might be time to sell the house, Mom." "Sell?" I repeated, stunned. "That's my home, Daniel. My memories with Henry are in those walls." Charlotte's voice was suddenly honeyed, but her words felt like ice. "It's just a house, Evelyn, and it's a liability now. It's sitting empty. We think it would be better if you stayed here with us. You'll be safer, and we can all move on." The words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her that my house wasn't just an asset to be sold, it was my life. But I couldn't bring myself to argue. I had no energy left to fight. "I'll think about it," I said, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. But I knew then that things were never going to be the same. This is the beginning of Evelyn's story. Her fall marks a significant shift in her life. Now she faces the difficult choices imposed by her family, which forces her to confront painful truths. The next parts will further unfold her journey as she navigates the emotional complexities of her relationships with her son and daughter-in-law, along with the tension building in her home. The days after the dinner were tense. Every interaction with Daniel and Charlotte felt strained, as if I was walking on eggshells, trying not to upset the delicate balance of their home. They were constantly worried about me, and while I appreciated their concern, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more beneath the surface. One morning, Charlotte made it clear that I was not to make any more decisions about my own life. As we sat down for breakfast, she casually mentioned, "We've been thinking, maybe it's time you stop worrying about your house. You've got plenty of time left to live a peaceful life here with us." I didn't respond right away, my spoon stirring the cereal in my bowl absently. The truth was, I wasn't worried about the house. I was worried about losing my independence, my dignity, my ability to make decisions without being looked after like a child. "I'm fine, Charlotte. I just need a little help now and then, that's all," I replied, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. She only smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I know you think you're fine, but you're not, and that's okay. We're family, Evelyn. We're here to help you." The patronizing tone made my skin crawl, but I said nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt like a burden. Every day I tried harder to be invisible, to blend into the background, but it didn't stop the feeling that I was being smothered, that they were waiting for me to do something they could control. That afternoon, I had a conversation with myself, sitting alone in the room where Henry and I had once spent so many hours. The weight of his absence pressed down on me, but I couldn't allow myself to stay frozen in the past. I needed to make a decision for myself. I wasn't ready to sell my house. I couldn't give up the last piece of Henry I had left. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my right to choose, my right to live the way I had always known without having someone make decisions for me. That night, after another of Daniel's lectures about how difficult things were for them, I decided it was time to speak up. "Daniel, I've made my decision," I said, my voice steady, though my heart raced. "I'm going back to my house." He stared at me in disbelief. "Mom, are you sure about this? You know it's not safe for you. The stairs." "I'm sure. I'll hire help if necessary, but I need to be in my own home." There was a long silence. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same conflict he'd had since his father's passing. Daniel had always been the peacemaker, but this time he didn't know what to say. Charlotte, however, didn't hold back. "That house is a burden, Evelyn. You can't live in the past forever." "I'm not living in the past. I'm living in the present, and the present is my home." Charlotte's expression hardened. "You can't stay there forever. It's not healthy. You don't have the energy anymore." "Maybe not, but I have the will to live the way I choose, and right now that means going home." I stood up, my voice trembling only slightly. "I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm going to take care of myself. I'm not asking for your permission." I left the room then, not waiting for their response. I had made up my mind. The next morning, I began packing. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. As I folded my clothes and stacked them neatly into my suitcase, I couldn't help but think of the life I had built in that house. Henry and I had fought hard for that place. It was more than just walls and floors. It was a symbol of our shared dreams. By the time Daniel returned from work, I was ready. I hadn't told him where I was going yet. I didn't need to explain myself further. My decision was final. "I'm going to leave, Daniel," I said quietly, my hands gripping the handle of the suitcase. Daniel's face fell. "Mom, don't do this." But I could hear the desperation in his voice. He didn't want me to leave, not because he cared for me, but because I was making things difficult for him. He couldn't see that by trying to help me, he was taking away the one thing I had left, my independence. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but this is something I need to do for myself." As I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I knew I had made the right choice, but the uncertainty that lay ahead was daunting. As I sat in the back seat of the taxi, my suitcase beside me, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The streets of the town seemed strangely unfamiliar now, as if I'd been away for years rather than weeks. I had lived in this town for over 30 years, yet today it felt like a foreign place. My old neighborhood, the one that had once been filled with the laughter of children and the comforting sounds of life, now felt like a distant memory. I kept my gaze out the window, watching familiar landmarks pass by, but my thoughts were miles away. There was so much uncertainty ahead of me. What would it be like to return to the house, to be alone again after all that had happened? Would I be able to manage on my own without the constant oversight of Daniel and Charlotte? Could I truly reclaim my independence, or would I find myself trapped once more by the limitations of my body? The taxi slowed to a stop in front of a small apartment complex, my destination for now. I had decided to stay with Marlene, the woman who had cared for me during my hip replacement surgery 2 years ago. We had become good friends since then, and when I reached out to her in a moment of desperation, she had welcomed me without hesitation. Marlene opened the door, her face registering surprise before concern. "Evelyn?" she asked, her voice soft, as she saw the suitcase in my hand. "What's going on?" I stepped inside, the comfort of her small apartment offering me a momentary relief. "I had to leave," I said, my voice shaky. "I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't be under their roof, living by their rules." Marlene, ever the kind-hearted soul, didn't question me. She took my bag and ushered me to the couch. "Come on, sit down, tell me everything," she said, her voice gentle but firm. And so I did. I told her about the fall, the move to Daniel and Charlotte's home, and the slow realization that they were trying to control more than just my living situation. I told her about Charlotte's cold words and the manipulation I had begun to see so clearly. I even told her about the ultimatum Charlotte had given me. "I don't know what's happening, Marlene," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I thought they were just trying to help, but now I realize it was all about control. They want my house, my money, and I was too blind to see it." "That woman," she muttered, shaking her head. "I always had a bad feeling about her, Evelyn. Always had dollar signs in her eyes." I swallowed hard, feeling the sting of betrayal deep in my chest. I never thought I'd have to say this about my own family. But now, I don't know who I can trust. "Don't say that," Marlene said gently, her hand resting on mine. "You can trust me. You have a friend in me, always." Her words, simple and sincere, brought tears to my eyes. It was the first time in weeks that I felt truly cared for, without strings attached. I squeezed her hand and nodded. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. I spent most of my time in Marlene's apartment trying to keep myself occupied with small tasks, organizing the guest room, cleaning, reading. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about my house. I couldn't stop missing it. The house was where Henry and I had built our lives together. Every room held memories, both beautiful and painful. And despite everything, I knew that going back was my only option, but the idea of doing so alone, without the help I had become accustomed to, filled me with dread. Marlene, sensing my unease, suggested we take a walk one afternoon. "It's a beautiful day. Maybe a bit of fresh air will do you good," she said with a smile, leading me outside. As we walked through the neighborhood, I felt a sense of peace return to me. It was as if I'd been holding my breath for days, and now I could finally exhale. The sunshine on my face, the sound of birds chirping, the laughter of children playing in the park, it all felt so familiar, so grounding. It reminded me that I was not alone, not truly. We ended our walk at the local cafe, where we ran into an old friend from the garden club, Betty. "Evelyn!" Betty exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Where have you been hiding? We haven't seen you in ages." Before I knew it, we were sitting together at a small table, sipping tea and catching up on old times. The conversation turned to my family, and I found myself opening up about everything that had happened: the fall, the move, and finally, my decision to leave Daniel and Charlotte's home. Betty, always direct, didn't hold back. "That daughter-in-law of yours?" She shook her head. "I never trusted her. Always thought she was after something. You're better off without her, Evelyn." Ruth, another friend from the club, added gently, "We don't want to speak ill of family, but it sounds like she's been making things difficult for you." I nodded, the weight of their words settling over me. I never wanted to believe it, but now I see the truth. The women shared their sympathy, but what struck me most of all was how they saw me, not as a frail old woman in need of saving, but as Evelyn, the woman who had been a part of their lives for so long, the woman who had lived through challenges and triumphs alike. "Whatever happens, Evelyn," Betty said, her voice firm, "don't forget you're not alone. You've got us, and we've got your back." In this part, Evelyn begins to find solace in her friends who offer her much-needed support and perspective. Her decision to leave Daniel and Charlotte's home becomes clearer as she starts to see that she is capable of making her own choices and taking control of her life. The friendship of people like Marlene and her garden club friends helps her reconnect with her sense of self, and she gains strength from knowing she's not truly alone. The days following my decision to stay with Marlene were both a relief and a challenge. I felt the weight of my past decisions lifting, but there was still the matter of my future. The house, my home, was still there, waiting for me, but the question remained, could I truly go back on my own? Was I strong enough to reclaim my life, or was I fooling myself? Marlene was a constant presence during this time, helping me adjust to my new routine. She would stop by in the mornings to have coffee together, and we'd chat about everything and nothing. I found comfort in her calm demeanor, her understanding of the quiet chaos that lived in my mind. But no matter how much time I spent with her, the longing to return to my house never faded. I had lived in that house for over 3 decades. It was where I raised Daniel, where Henry and I had spent our happiest years. It wasn't just a house, it was my history, my identity. I couldn't imagine my life without it. One evening, as I sat on Marlene's couch, I realized something important. It wasn't just about the house. It was about me, about my autonomy, about proving to myself that I was still capable of making decisions for my own well-being. I had been manipulated for too long, first by Henry's illness, then by Daniel's well-meaning but controlling behavior, and finally by Charlotte's cold, calculated attempts to take over. I had allowed it to happen because I was too afraid to stand up for myself. But now I had to change that. "I think I'm ready," I told Marlene one night as she set down a cup of tea in front of me. "I'm going back to the house." Marlene didn't hesitate. She simply nodded and gave me a reassuring smile. "You'll be okay, Evelyn. You've made it through so much already. This is just the next step." It wasn't that simple, of course. The truth of the matter was, I was terrified. The house would be empty without Henry, without the life we had shared. But that didn't mean I couldn't still find a way to make it my own again. The next morning, I made the decision to visit the house. It wasn't going to be a permanent move, not yet, but I needed to see it for myself, to remind myself of its place in my life. As the taxi drove me down the familiar streets, I could feel my heart rate pick up. When we finally turned onto the street where I had spent most of my life, I felt a lump form in my throat. The house loomed in front of me, just as I remembered it. The large two-story colonial with its ivy-covered porch and flower garden stood as it always had, waiting for me. I paid the taxi driver and stood there for a moment, taking in the familiar sight. It looked the same, nothing had changed, but everything within me felt different. I walked up the front steps, key in hand, and unlocked the door. The silence inside was overwhelming. The air smelled stale, the windows covered with dust. It had been months since I last set foot here. Stepping inside felt like stepping into a time capsule. The living room was just as I remembered, the old armchair where Henry used to sit still in its place. The kitchen, though not used for so long, held the echoes of countless mornings spent cooking together. I walked through the rooms, each one flooded with memories. The sound of Henry's laughter, the taste of our favorite meals, the warmth of a life we had built. I walked into the garden where the roses Henry had planted were now wild and untamed. The weeds had overrun the flower beds, and the fountain was no longer working. But even in its overgrown state, it still felt like home. It was where we had spent hours working together, tending to the plants, discussing everything and nothing at the same time. I sat down on the old bench we'd once built together and let the quiet surround me. This was my place. This is where I belonged. But as I sat there, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my chest. The house was a part of me, but so was the person I was becoming. Could I truly live here alone? Could I manage without the constant support of Daniel and Charlotte? The doorbell rang, breaking my thoughts. I hadn't expected anyone. Hesitantly, I stood up and walked back to the door, opening it to find none other than Daniel standing on the other side, his face drawn with concern. "Mom," he said softly, his voice carrying an undercurrent of guilt. "I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about everything. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you." I was stunned. For the first time in weeks, there was no defensiveness in his voice, no hidden agenda. There was only sincerity. "I didn't want to hurt you, Mom," he said, continuing, his eyes searching mine for some kind of understanding. "I just was worried, but I see now that I was overstepping. I'm sorry." His words hung in the air between us. After everything that had happened, after everything I had learned about Charlotte's manipulation, could I forgive him? Could I accept his apology? "I appreciate you saying that, Daniel," I said after a long pause. "But it's not just about what happened. It's about what comes next. I need to make my own decisions now, for myself. I'm not asking for your permission, but I want you to understand that I'm doing this because I need to." His face softened, and for a moment I saw the son I used to know, the son who had grown up with love, not manipulation. "I get it, Mom," he said quietly, "and I'll support whatever you decide. I just want you to be happy." The conversation didn't end with a hug or a grand reconciliation, but it was a start. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I was learning to take it one day at a time. As Daniel left, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him walk away. My heart felt heavy, but a small part of me was beginning to heal. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to give up now. The following days were filled with a quiet, uncertain peace. I had returned to the house, but it wasn't as simple as just stepping back into my old life. The house still felt like a stranger, a place I once knew intimately but had distanced myself from. The rooms were full of memories, too many perhaps, and the weight of it all sometimes felt overwhelming. But there was a strange comfort in being back. The house, despite its silence, was still mine. It was my history, my connection to Henry, to the life we had shared. And as much as I feared being alone here, I also knew that this was where I needed to be. Marlene visited every few days to check on me. Her support was a lifeline, and I was beginning to realize just how much I had underestimated the power of true friendship. She didn't look at me with pity or as though I was a burden. She saw me as a woman with strength, a woman who had fought through her own battles and was still capable of standing on her own 2 feet. "How are you settling in?" Marlene asked one afternoon when she came over with a basket of groceries. "I'm managing," I replied, trying to keep the hesitation out of my voice. "It's strange, but I think I'm starting to get used to it." She set the basket down on the kitchen counter and turned to face me. "You know, Evelyn, you've been through a lot in the past few months, but I think you're stronger than you realize. You don't need anyone else to tell you what to do. You've got this." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't used to hearing words of affirmation, not in the way Marlene gave them. It wasn't just the usual pleasantries. It was a recognition of my strength, even when I didn't see it myself. It was like a flicker of light in a room that had been dark for far too long. I smiled at her, though my eyes welled with tears. "Thank you, Marlene. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You won't have to find out," she said firmly. "You've got me, Evelyn. Always." As the days passed, I found myself getting back into a rhythm. I spent my mornings in the garden, pulling weeds and trimming the hedges. I even tackled the overgrown roses that Henry had once cared for with such dedication. There was something cathartic about getting my hands dirty in the soil. It grounded me, reminded me of the love and care Henry had put in this house, into everything we built together. But even as I worked, my mind often drifted back to Daniel. I couldn't shake the memory of his apology. It had felt genuine, and yet I still didn't know if I could trust him completely. Had he truly understood the weight of what had happened, or was he just trying to placate me, to get me to return to the family home where everything was right again? I didn't know. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living in uncertainty. I needed to move forward, not just for my sake, but for the sake of my future. I couldn't let Charlotte's manipulations and my son's guilt keep me from living the life I wanted to live. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, I made a decision. I was going to call Daniel. Not to ask for his permission, but to speak my truth, to tell him that I needed him to respect my decision. It wasn't about the house. It was about my right to live independently, to make my own choices. The phone call came later that week. I dialed Daniel's number, my heart pounding in my chest. It had been days since we last spoke, and I wasn't sure how he would react to my request. "Hello?" Daniel's voice was cautious, like he was walking on eggshells. "Hi, Daniel," I said, trying to sound calm. "I've been thinking about everything." "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I mean," I began slowly, "I need you to respect my decision to stay here. I know it's not what you wanted, but it's what I need. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just asking you to understand that this is my choice." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if he was going to argue again. But then he spoke softly. "I do understand, Mom. I might not have agreed at first, but I get it now. You need to live your life on your own terms, and I respect that." I let out a breath that I didn't realize I had been holding. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." "I'll be here for you, Mom. I promise," he added, his voice sincere. As I hung up the phone, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was truly in control of my life again. The tension that had hung over me for so long seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. But just as I thought I could relax, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "We need to talk. This can't go on, Evelyn. You're putting all of us in a difficult position." Her message sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, but I had made a promise to myself, and I wasn't about to back down now. The message from Charlotte lingered in my mind for hours after I read it. "We need to talk. This can't go on, Evelyn. You're putting all of us in a difficult position." The words seemed to echo in the quiet of the house, bouncing off the walls, making the stillness feel even more oppressive. I knew that Charlotte wasn't done. After all, I had made it clear that I wouldn't be returning to their home, and now she was demanding a conversation. The urgency in her message was unmistakable, as if she were trying to manipulate me into believing that I was the one causing the problem. I sat at the kitchen table, the warm mug of tea in front of me growing cold. I had spent so many years trying to avoid conflict, trying to smooth things over, but now I was done with that. I had to stop allowing others to dictate my life, and that included Charlotte. I was tired of being painted as the difficult one, the stubborn one. For once, I wanted to be the one to set the terms, to speak my truth without fear of rejection or guilt. I picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice soft but weary. "Hi, Mom. How's it going?" "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause before he replied. "What's going on?" "I got a message from Charlotte," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "She wants to talk." I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. I knew this was coming. She's been upset for a while. "That's what I need to talk to you about, Daniel," I said, the words coming out firmer than I expected. "I'm not going back there. I can't. I won't." He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel his struggle. "I know you're upset, Mom, but we're just trying to help you. You're not—" "I'm not helpless," I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. "I've never been helpless, Daniel, and I'm not going to let Charlotte make me feel like I am. I understand that she's frustrated, but I need you to understand that this is my choice. I need to live my life my way, even if it's not what you or she want." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on, and I wondered if I'd pushed too hard. But then Daniel spoke, his voice quieter, more measured. "I understand, Mom. I know this is hard for you, and I'm sorry for everything that's happened. But I need you to know that I'm not taking sides. I'm just trying to understand what's best for you." I exhaled slowly, feeling a small weight lift from my chest. "I just need time, Daniel. Time to figure out what comes next. I'm not ready to be dictated to anymore." "I hear you," he said softly. "I'll talk to Charlotte, but I hope we can still find a way to work things out. You're my mom, and I love you." "I love you too," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I just need you to respect my decision." After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I had spoken my truth, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't walking on eggshells. I had made it clear that I was no longer willing to live under the thumb of anyone else. This was my life, and I was going to live it the way I saw fit. But that didn't mean the storm was over. Later that evening, Charlotte called. I didn't answer right away, but I knew she wouldn't let me avoid her for long. She was persistent, calculating. She would keep pushing until she got what she wanted. I waited for the voicemail to come through, and when it did, I listened carefully to her words, the sweetness laced with barely concealed anger. "Evelyn, we need to talk. This situation isn't working for any of us, and I think you know that. You're making things difficult for Daniel and for me. We've tried to be patient, but we can't keep doing this. We need to find a way to move forward, and you're the one who needs to make that happen." I could almost see her standing on the other end, arms crossed, her eyes narrowing in that calculating way she had. It was always about control with Charlotte, always about getting things to go her way. She had never understood that I had a mind of my own, that I wasn't just some frail old woman waiting for someone to rescue me. I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to discuss. I had made my decision, and I was not going to let Charlotte manipulate me any longer. The next morning, I took a walk around the garden. The sun was shining, the air crisp and clean. I could hear the distant hum of the neighborhood, the sounds of life moving on without me. It felt good to be outside, to be in control of my own space again. I had work to do, cleaning, organizing, making this place mine again. Marlene came by later that afternoon, and we spent the day together, cleaning up the house, sorting through old boxes of memories. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt like progress. Every time I dusted a shelf or organized a drawer, I felt a little bit more like myself again. As we worked, I couldn't help but think about Daniel's words. He had apologized for everything that's happened, but I wasn't sure how much of that apology was genuine. Charlotte was still in the picture, still pulling strings behind the scenes. I knew I couldn't trust her, but could I trust Daniel? Could I trust him to support me without falling under her influence again? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to back down. This was my life, and I was going to live it on my terms. It was time to stop being the one who always bent to the will of others. I had to take charge for my own sake. The weeks that followed my conversation with Charlotte were a mixture of quiet defiance and lingering tension. Life in the house was starting to feel like a new chapter, but the specter of Charlotte's manipulation still hovered over me. I had made the decision to stay, to take control of my future, but the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. Every decision, every step I took now seemed to carry the weight of what I had left behind. The house was becoming a home again, little by little. I had hired a caregiver to assist with the daily tasks that had once been second nature to me. Marlene checked in often, and I had begun to reconnect with old friends. Still, there were moments of doubt. There were nights when the silence in the house felt too loud, when the memories of Henry and the life we had shared threatened to overwhelm me. I spent my days keeping busy, tending to the garden, sorting through old boxes of photos, and writing letters I never intended to send. The house, once filled with the sounds of our laughter and love, was now filled with the echoes of my own thoughts. It was both comforting and suffocating. But I wasn't alone. Marlene's visits helped. She wasn't just a caregiver, she was a friend, a confidant. There was something grounding about her presence. She had her own life, her own struggles, but she never made me feel like I was a burden. She understood me in a way that no one else could. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch swing watching the sun dip below the horizon, I received a message from Daniel. He was asking if I'd be willing to meet him for coffee. The request felt like a small but significant gesture. After everything that had happened, after the rift between us, the fact that he wanted to sit down and talk seemed like a step forward. Maybe he was finally starting to understand. I agreed to meet him the following morning. When I arrived at the small cafe in town, I found him sitting at a corner table, his expression serious but not hostile. He stood as I approached and offered me a small, hesitant smile. "Mom," he said, pulling out the chair for me, "I'm glad you came." I sat down, grateful for the warmth of the coffee in front of me. "I was surprised to hear from you," I replied, my voice cautious but open. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, looking down at his coffee cup before meeting my gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," his voice tight. "I know things got out of hand, and I know I didn't handle it the right way. I should have listened to you more, but Charlotte and I have been through a lot too. It's been hard, Mom." I studied him for a moment, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. "I understand that, Daniel, I do," I said slowly. "But I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for respect. I'm not a child. I don't need to be taken care of like this." "I get that," he said, his voice softening, "and I'm sorry for not respecting that sooner. You've always been strong, and I should have seen that. I didn't realize how much I was trying to control things. It's just that I've always wanted to protect you. You're my mom. I don't want to lose you." His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long I had felt like I was losing my son to someone else's influence, but here he was acknowledging his mistakes. It wasn't easy for him, I could see that. "I'm not going anywhere, Daniel," I said quietly, "but I have to live my life the way I see fit. I can't do that if I'm constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I'm making the right decision. You and Charlotte, you're both trying to help, but sometimes you're not helping me. You're just making it harder." He looked down at his coffee again, his hands gripping the mug tightly. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry. I can't take back what's been said or done, but I want you to know that I respect you, Mom. I don't agree with everything, but I'll support you. I just want you to be happy." For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of clinking cups and the soft hum of the cafe around us. And then, slowly, I nodded. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know." We sat there for a while longer, discussing trivial things, work, the weather, our old favorite movies, but the heaviness between us had lifted. I could feel a change, a shift towards something new. Perhaps we were on the path to rebuilding our relationship, but it wouldn't happen overnight. I had to rebuild trust, and so did he. But for the first time in months, I felt hope. As we stood to leave, Daniel gave me a long hug. "I'll call you soon," he said, pulling away with a smile. I smiled back, feeling the weight of years of tension slowly start to fade. I'd like that. That evening, as I sat on the porch swing again, the last light of the day fading into twilight, I thought about everything I had gone through to get here. I had faced my fears, spoken my truth, and finally stood up for myself. And while the future was still uncertain, I felt more at peace than I had in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but I had learned something invaluable over the past few months. I was stronger than I realized, and I wasn't done yet. In this part, Evelyn and Daniel have a heartfelt conversation that begins to heal their strained relationship. Although there is still tension with Charlotte, Evelyn starts to see that not everything is lost. With Marlene's support and her newfound sense of independence, she is beginning to find her footing again, and the future seems a little brighter. In the days that followed my meeting with Daniel, I felt a cautious optimism settling in. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up with a knot in my stomach, dreading the inevitable confrontation with Charlotte, or feeling guilty for taking a stand. Instead, I woke up with a sense of purpose, a feeling that I was finally in control of my own life again. But it wasn't going to be easy. Charlotte wasn't the type to give up so easily. I could already hear the simmering tension in her voice when she had left the voicemail last week. She was never one to accept things as they were, especially not when it involved losing control over me. She would come at me again. Of that I was sure. Marlene had been my anchor during this time, her unflinching support giving me the strength to continue. But even she couldn't calm the storm I knew was coming. It was one thing to stand my ground, to refuse to bend under pressure from Daniel, but Charlotte, she was another matter entirely. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through old papers when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello?" "Evelyn." Charlotte's voice came through, sharp and unyielding. "We need to talk." The words made my blood run cold. "I'm not interested in talking, Charlotte." "I think you should reconsider," she pressed. "You're making a mistake by pushing us away like this. This whole situation is damaging to everyone, especially to Daniel." I stayed silent, unwilling to engage in her manipulative tactics, but I wasn't ready to let her control the conversation either. "This is my decision, Charlotte. I've made it very clear. I'm not going back to your house, I'm not going to live under your thumb, and I'm not going to keep pretending like everything is okay when it's not." She scoffed. "You think this is about control? You've got it all wrong, Evelyn. This is about family. You're tearing us apart. Daniel is worried sick about you. You're the one making this harder than it needs to be." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "If you really cared about family, Charlotte, you wouldn't have tried to manipulate me into giving up my home. You wouldn't have tried to push me out of my own life." Her silence on the other end spoke volumes. Then, in a tone that was more calculating than I had ever heard before, she said, "I understand that you're upset, but this isn't just about you. It's about what's best for everyone, for your health, for Daniel's peace of mind. You're getting older, Evelyn. You can't keep living in the past." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. She was right in some ways. I was getting older, and the house, my beautiful, solitary sanctuary, wasn't as easy to maintain as it once was. The stairs, the maintenance, the upkeep, it was all becoming too much, but it was still mine. It was my life. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. "I've hired help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm managing just fine. I don't need you or Daniel to tell me what's best for me." Charlotte didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted, softer, almost pleading. "I just want what's best for you, Evelyn, what's best for our family." I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. "I don't think you know what's best for me," I said quietly. "If you did, you'd understand that I need to make my own decisions, and I need you to respect that." Another long silence followed, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had a sharp edge to it. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." Before I could respond, the line dead-ended. I set the phone down slowly, a mixture of relief and unease swirling inside me. Charlotte was done playing nice, and I knew what that meant. She wasn't finished yet. She had her own agenda, and no matter how much I tried to resist, she would continue to push. But something had changed in me. I had stood my ground today, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone else decide my future for me. That night, as I sat in the living room, the familiar hum of the house surrounding me, I thought about everything that had happened, the conversations with Daniel, the manipulations with Charlotte, and the deep-rooted fear that had kept me from truly standing up for myself. I had spent so many years afraid of being alone, afraid of being judged, of not being enough. But now I knew that I was enough. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices. I didn't need to live up to anyone else's expectations. I had already fought for this house. I had already fought for my life. And now it was time to fight for my peace. The phone buzzed again, but this time I ignored it. Charlotte's games were over. The days that followed Charlotte's phone call were filled with a new sense of purpose. I had taken a stand, and although the conflict wasn't over, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders with each passing day. The house that had once felt like a burden, overwhelming and filled with memories of a life I wasn't sure I could return to, was beginning to feel like my sanctuary again. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was all I needed. I spent the next few weeks focusing on making the house a home once again. The garden, which had been overrun with weeds, began to bloom under my care. The rooms, which had felt so empty and cold when I first returned, were filled with warmth as I moved things around, putting my personal touch back into every corner. I made space for new memories, ones that would no longer be tainted by the past. Daniel had continued to reach out, and while I still wasn't ready to fully embrace him in the way I once had, there was progress. He respected my space, and that was more than I could have hoped for. We had set boundaries, something I had never done before, and the quiet understanding between us was beginning to heal the cracks in our relationship. He no longer saw me as a burden, but as a person who could make her own choices. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, I reflected on how far I had come. The woman who had once been afraid to assert herself, afraid of losing her family, had transformed into someone who could stand on her own. The house, once filled with the echoes of my fears, now hummed with the quiet satisfaction of a life I was finally living for myself. But just as I felt myself settling into the rhythm of this new chapter, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I was surprised to find Marlene standing on the other side, her smile bright, but her eyes searching mine for something deeper. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, her tone light but knowing. "I thought I'd stop by, see how things were going." I stepped aside to let her in, and we walked into the living room where we sat down together. I had grown accustomed to her presence, to the way she made me feel understood without needing to say much. "You're doing well, Evelyn," Marlene said quietly, her voice warm with affection. "You've come so far." I smiled, though it wasn't without some bitter sweetness. "I'm not there yet. There's still a long way to go." "I know," she replied, her eyes softening, "but you're already living life on your terms. That's the hardest part." I took a deep breath, feeling the truth of her words settle in my chest. I had fought for this, fought for my independence, fought for my voice, and it was a fight worth having. "Thank you, Marlene," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for everything." "That's what friends are for," she said, her smile gentle. "I'll always be here, Evelyn, whenever you need me." As we sat together, sipping our tea, I realized something important. The life I had once feared losing wasn't gone. It had just changed. And in that change, I had found strength I never knew I had. Life is filled with moments of transformation where we find the strength to reclaim what is rightfully ours. Evelyn's story is one of courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what you believe in. If you've ever had to fight for your independence, or if you found yourself in a situation where you had to stand up for your own future, you're not alone. If you enjoyed Evelyn's journey, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment where you had to take control of your own life? What did you learn from it? Let's continue the conversation. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us all that it's never too late to take charge of our destiny. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter what life throws your way, you have the strength to rise above it.